I wanted to start by just sharing a little bit about the significance of data. Data collection is an important element when making improvements because without it, there's a lack of evidence that problems exist. It can change the ways in which we work and can provide better outcomes for those who receive care and support. Data collection can be used to paint a picture of the current state and provide insight into current issues and hone in on where improvements should focus. It can help us define needs, set goals, plan interventions, and evaluate progress. Every time data is collected, collated, analyzed, and processed, presented or shared, it should be for the benefit of the people we support, not just for the sake of collecting data.
Strengthening Stark was very much a call to action. It started out as an initiative. It has become a movement across the county. I'm very pleased to see the progress that is being made across the county in all geographic areas. And the purpose of that report was to set the stage for creating a growing economy with good jobs and rising incomes for everyone. But we also knew when we published Strengthening Stark that that was only part of the story. The other component of a healthy community is the social infrastructure, or what we call the social fabric of Stark County. And thus we have a companion piece to Strengthening Stark, which is Protecting Stark's Future, which was just released a couple days ago. Again, it's a data-driven analysis of the social fabric of Stark County. And we believe that when you merge the two, you read Strengthening Stark and then its companion piece, Protecting Stark's Future, you will see that we have a blueprint for action, let's say another call to action.
So a couple things happened last fall that really spurred us to action and felt like child poverty is what we really need to be focusing on. In September of last year, the US Census Bureau released data that puts Canton, Ohio at the very bottom of the list in child poverty. So the worst child poverty rate of any city in the United States with a population over 65,000. And so the report released this week examines child poverty in Stark County in depth, including those issues that are associated with poverty, and it lays out a clear path forward. Here you can see a bit of a summary of what the report itself hopes to do. The white paper itself lays out a very clear argument and the case for a coordinated approach to address child poverty, and specifically 7 recommendations to address child poverty and ways to move forward that I'll talk about more in a moment. We included data and information relating to the need for urgent action, to addressing immediate needs while increasing the earnings of families, to breaking cycles of poverty, and the resources and action required. In Stark County, 14% of people lived in poverty before COVID-19. That's about 1 out of every 7 residents in your county, but it's not spread evenly. There are pockets of poverty in every community in Stark County, but the larger cities in your county tend to have higher poverty rates. And it's also not spread evenly among various racial and ethnic groups. We certainly see some racial disparities when we look at poverty in Stark County. And in Stark County and across the state, the younger you are, the more likely you are to live in poverty. In Canton in particular, child poverty is at crisis levels. So I showed you the data that was released last fall. This is the data that was released just a few months ago in September 2020. And Canton, although the poverty rate increased a bit year over year, other places rose faster. So that today, Canton sits at 2nd worst on this list, tied with Youngstown, Ohio. But why do we care in particular about child poverty, especially if our children aren't living in poverty? Well, time and time again, the data shows us that poverty costs us all. By age 4, poor children have heard 30 million fewer words than their better off peers. Poor children are more likely to be hungry and less likely to have affordable quality health coverage, which can have a lifetime of impacts. Poor children are less likely to graduate from high school. Child poverty increases the risk of unemployment and adult poverty. And poverty has been linked to just about every negative community condition in the social fabric that you can imagine. There is more in the white paper itself, and we talk a little bit more about the implications of these things, but we also lay out a path forward and some recommendations that I want to quickly run through. The first is that organizations should coordinate the planning and implementation of well-defined projects and activities toward a comprehensive child poverty reduction plan for Stark County with a specific neighborhood level focus. So this is about getting together, coordinating efforts. It could look like a quarterback. It could look like something else. The next recommendation is that child poverty reduction plans for Stark County should consist of addressing immediate needs, looking more heavily toward breaking the cycles of poverty by increasing the earnings of families and promoting activities that integrate financial planning and incorporate neighborhood level strategies, all the things that we've been talking about. The third recommendation is that efforts to reduce child poverty must include work with both children and their families, promote household stability, focus on reducing disparities, and recognize that place matters. The fourth recommendation is that the Stark County community should invest more resources into child poverty reduction and leverage public dollars. Government has a very important role to play in the reduction of poverty and the amelioration of those current pressing issues. Recommendation 5 is that economic development strategies should be targeted to enhance the ability of workers to earn family-sustaining wages regardless of where they live and to close gender and wage gaps. When we close those gaps, the entire community wins. It means more earnings, which means greater taxes, which means less demand for those expensive social services that are addressing immediate needs. And recommendation number 6 is that existing best-in-class programs and agencies should be supported and strengthened to achieve their impact potential, while encouraged to explore new partnerships through collaborative efforts, especially with agencies that are already embedded in communities and neighborhoods. And so it is less a matter of building something new and more about bringing things to scale and of bringing the resources to bear on this very challenging problem. And that brings us to recommendation number 7, which is the last, but probably the most important one. And that is that all organizations and institutions that care about the future of Stark County need to identify how they will help support and sustain the implementation of a child poverty reduction plan for our community.
So I'm just going to take a few minutes and discuss the funding opportunity that we are making available in response to what we've been talking about today. So if we look at that targets for a child poverty reduction plan, just want to be very clear that the focus of this request for proposals is to address child poverty rates through efforts that increase the earnings of families and break cycles of poverty. So in terms of immediate needs, we absolutely recognize and will continue to support immediate needs as they relate to child poverty. And you can learn more about all of our funding opportunities in terms of Stark Community Foundations on our funding opportunities page. We have several opportunities that you can take a look at. And we also realize that there are a lot more funds available that speak to immediate needs, even outside of philanthropic dollars. So we're certainly mindful of the investments that we're making here in this regard. All communities in Stark County are invited to participate in this conversation. We invite you to be involved and certainly encourage you to apply for funding and at least be involved in the conversation. I'll touch upon a couple of highlights of the RFP. You can access it in its entirety later this week along with this webinar. We'll also have the data assessment, Strengthening Stark, and this report that we're talking about today, all captured on one page so you don't have to go searching for everything. So in terms of the projects that we're looking to fund, the desired projects will noticeably strive to improve a specific neighborhood in Stark County in terms of addressing child poverty. These projects will clearly outline goals and objectives. And again, it's very important that we tie back to the data that we've been talking about here today. So in terms of grants that will be available, there's 2 tracks. The first is a 1-year planning grant up to a maximum of $15,000. And these are projects, hence the name, that seek to support further opportunity to explore a project with the intention of implementing the project. And again, the RFP will go into much greater detail. And once a project has been through the planning stage, we will be offering implementation grants, which is a 1 to 3 years with a maximum award of $100,000. And if you're sitting here listening and you have a project that's about to be implemented or is being implemented as we speak, as long as you can demonstrate that there was a sufficient planning period, we will consider an implementation grant. But again, we can talk about that later on down the road. Certainly, as has been stressed throughout this webinar today, we are encouraging organizations to collaborate with one another. We understand that those can also be challenges, but when it's done effectively, it's to the greater good for all of us. This can be a larger entity and a grassroots organization. This can be 4 larger entities, whatever makes sense for your organization and meeting your organizational goals.
As you can see on your screen, if you do want to follow up with Amy specifically with questions about that, the RFP, her information is on the screen right there. And then also, here is that link that we mentioned, that a recording of this webinar, the slides, and then more information about that RFP will be available by this Friday at that link that is on your screen right now.